Method of notation. A system of naming the squares and moves of pieces which has been described so far is known as notation. In writing down a capture by a pawn, all that is indicated as to what file the pawn passes. In a position where two pieces of the same kind can go to the given square, additional information is provided. For instance,
Rook H E1
means that of the two rooks that could have occupied the E1 square, it is the rook on H1, and not the rook on D1, that did it. For greater precision, the number of the rank is also employed. For instance, if white's knights stand on E2 and E4, then the next move should be written
Knight 4 G3.
The following signs are used in annotation for economy of space. Exclamation mark, a good move. Exclamation mark, exclamation mark, a very good, beautiful move. Question mark, a weak move. Question mark, a bad mistake. Question mark, exclamation mark, a risky, questionable move. Infinity, unclear position, equals equal position, plus or minus white's position is superior. White's position is somewhat preferable. Minus or plus black's position is better. Black's position is somewhat preferable. Up to now we have written down the moves linearly. But there is also a columnar form. As an example, here is one of the shortest games ever played in a tournament.
D4. Knight F6. Knight D2. E5. D takes E5. Knight G4.
It is possible to play
E4. Knight takes E5. Knight B3. D6. F4. Knight E D7. Queen F3. A5. Knight D4. Knight F6. Bishop D3.
It is possible to play
Knight G F3. Bishop C5. Knight E4. Queen E7. Queen D5. Knight A6. Bishop G5. Queen E6. Queen takes E6. Check. F takes E6. E3. Bishop B4. Check. C3. Bishop F8. Bishop F4. Knight C5. Knight takes C5. Bishop takes C5. Rook D1. A5. A4. Knight C6. Knight C4. Bishop C5. E3. Queen E7. Queen D5. D6. E takes D6. C takes D6. H3. H3.
Clearly white lacks thoughtfulness and deliberation. He impatiently wants to drive away the approaching knight, though actually it is not a danger to him.
Knight E3.
White resigned because the loss of the queen was inevitable.
F takes E3. Queen H4. Check. G3. Queen takes G3. Mate.
This miniature game was played in the Championship of Paris. For the sake of comparison, here is that game in the condensed style of notation. A. Gibaud. F. Lazare Paris, 1924. 1. D4 coup de F6 2. Coup de D2 E5 3. D Poucol E5 coup de G4 4. H3. Coup de E3. White resigned. In recording the position on the board, we designate the location of the chessmen in the following order: king, queen, rooks, bishop, knights, and then pawns. For example, the position in this diagram appears thus: white, k1, qd1, ra1, rh1, bc1, bf1, nb1, ing1, pawns a2, b2, c2, d4, e5, f2, g2, h2, 16. Black, k8, qd8, ra8, rh8, bc8, bf8, nb8, ing8, pawns a7, b7, c7, d5, e6, f5, g7, h7, 16. The position is described from the q side to the king's flank. First, the location of the white's black squared bishop, c1, is given, then that of the white's squared, f1, the first to be put down is the a2 pawn, and the last the h2 pawn. The total number of pieces and pawns is given in brackets. In playing the game, especially in exchanges, it is necessary to know the value of the pieces and pawns. The queen, as mentioned above, is the most powerful piece. It is approximately equal to 2 rooks, or to a rook, a minor piece, and 2 pawns. However, a rook and minor pieces are stronger than the queen. The rook is the second strongest piece. It has greater value than bishop or knight. The exchange of a bishop or knight for a rook has a special term: winning the exchange, or for the other side, losing the exchange. Usually the exchange is worth 2 pawns, i.e., the bishop or knight plus 2 pawns are approximately of the same value as the rook. Depending on the position, even a pawn can compensate the loss of the exchange. The rook is weaker than 2 minor pieces, which may be equal in strength to a rook and pawns. The knight is of the same strength as the bishop. A minor piece is equal to 3 pawns. The pawn is the weakest of the chess troops, but it should not be scorned. The importance of pawns increases towards the end of play, when there is not enough strength on the board to declare mate, and victory is achieved by the side which manages to promote a pawn to a queen. The king is the most valuable piece, and the outcome of the game depends on its fate. It is worthwhile sacrificing pieces and pawns in order to achieve mate. However, the king differs from all the other pieces in that his value is not equal to his strength. At the start of the game, the opening, as well as in middle game, this is a weak piece that has to be safeguarded in all possible ways, but in the end, when there is no danger of being mated by the few pieces remaining on the board, the king's strength increases sharply between that of a minor piece and rook. These appraisals are a result of the experience gained by generations of chess players. They should not be treated as absolute rules that hold true always and under all circumstances. Experienced players know that not a single piece or pawn has a constant value. Their value changes depending on the position. Here black has an overwhelming superiority in forces, a queen versus a bishop. White, however, is in no hurry to lay down his weapons.
Bishop c7.
Threatening 2. Gauja g3 mat. Black loses in the case of
g4.
Because then follows
Bishop d8. Check.
And in the case of
Queen e1. g3. Check. Queen f2. Bishop d6.
waiting move. That is the term used for a move marking time in order to hand over the move to the opponent. Now black finds himself in zugzwang, i.e., a situation in which any move leads to the disadvantage of the player whose turn to move. Indeed, black's queen cannot leave the f2 square, otherwise there will follow 3, g3 mat. Neither can black's pawn on g5 move because a 3. Gauja e7 sekik mentari f6 4. Gauja pukul f6 mat.
Queen f4. Check.
The queen has to be sacrificed, after 3. Gauja pukul f4 grams pukul f4, at least a draw, but
g3. Check. Queen takes g3. Check. Bishop takes g3. Mate.
Thus, in the diagrammed position, the unhappy situation of black's king makes the queen weaker than the bishop. This example is not intended to shake your faith in the comparative values of chessmen set forth above. They are correct and you can boldly depend on them in play. But rules have their exceptions. While gradually perfecting your play, you will learn to see the special features of every position more clear, evaluate the strength of the pieces and pawns with greater finesse, and discover remarkable exceptions like the one just cited. Additional rules. If a player whose turn it is to move touches one of his chessmen, he is obliged to move it, and if he touches an opposing piece or pawn, he must capture it. This does not apply, of course, to a chessman that cannot move or the opponent's one that cannot be captured. An opponent touching simultaneously his own and the opponent's chessman is to take the latter, by the piece he touched, and if that is impossible, or if not, then by any other piece, and if according to the rules that is impossible, then he has to make a move with his piece he touched. On wishing to adjust one or more pieces on his squares, the player whose turn it is to move has to notify his opponent. It is customary to use the expression, "I adjust." The adjustment can be made only in the presence of his opponent, and if the latter has left the table, then in the presence of the umpire. A move is considered made when the player has put the piece or pawn on a new square and removed his hand from it. As long as player keeps his hand on the chessman, he can make any move with it. A player may suggest a draw only after completing a move. The opponent may accept the draw or refuse it either by saying so or by making his next move. A player may repeat the offer of a draw only after his opponent, in turn, has made use of his right to suggest a draw. If a draw proposed by a player before his turn, the opponent is entitled to request the move to be made, after which the draw offer shall remain active until its consent or refusal. Secondary draw offering is possible only after the opponent uses his right to offer a draw. It is not obligatory to declare check or mate verbally. Now you should be sufficiently acquainted with the rules to play your first game. Sit down at the table, decide, by drawing lots, who is to have the white and who the black chessman, and make your first move. But you still have a lot to learn about the game. Combine playing chess with a study of the following chapters.